Good evening, everybody, and welcome to our Thursday episode of Starman and the Boomer. It is actually a Starman and the Boomer as well, because as you may notice by our hilarious thumbnail, which I had a lot of fun making, Trig is with us again.
Yes. Hi. How's it going? Are you well, dude? Are you well? It's been a hot week. It's been a good week. Shit has been
It
happening.
has been a God. I can't even spell refresh. Sorry, I like to put the refresh note in the chat 'cause it doesn't like to start for a lot of people.
It's okay.
I'm doing
You spelt it with a Chinese accent. Fresh.
refresh, refresh. Um, we've got a couple of well, I guess we got one queued up thing. We're gonna keep playing at people at some point, which I think is on the other screen. But no, I'm doing pretty good. Evelyn is still at the Mises Institute. She's there till Monday, so we probably won't be streaming on Monday again since I'll be traveling that day because I have a long weekend planned. But we should be keeping up with these Thursday streams, and Evelyn will probably be with us again next Thursday. I probably won't have time to record anything for Monday, so we are on a weekly schedule again. But we're at least keeping up the weekly schedule. So this stream started out. I was going to make a short video as a follow up to our Sri Lanka video, since a few people complained about us not mentioning the China angle, but we were really talking about the World Academic Forum angle stuff. And honestly, I think some of the research
Same
here
thing.
is yeah,
Sorry.
yeah, some of the research here has vindicated a bit of that, and that there isn't as much as of a Chinese factor as some people have been making out with the Sri Lanka stuff. There was in the terms of the power struggle, but we'll get into that a bit later. But I evolved this, obviously with Trig here too, into more of a general Belt and Road stream, because I think it's something that not many people are talking about right now. And I also think it's something that people have taken their eye off, because it was big news a few years ago. It disappeared somewhere in the COVID shuffle, and it hasn't really re-emerged with a lot of the global trade route stuff, a lot of the, the hangover from the lockdowns and all the trouble with getting stuff shipped, the energy crises, Ukraine, blah 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 blah. People are talking about China in bits, but I think they're talking about China in the wrong way, because really interesting stuff is happening with China, not in the ways that many people predicted. Because the Trig, I don't know. Do you want to, being slightly older than me, when do you first remember Belt and Road being mentioned as like a blanket policy?
Oh, I'm not cheating, but I do remember it being around about 2013, which was roughly when they started talking about One Belt, One Road.
Yes.
And the essentially the Silk Road Initiative, and then they changed it to the Belt and Road Initiative. And
Uh,
yeah, I was keeping an eye on it then, and it was a bit sort of, oh, you're trying to do this, and then a bit of research later, and it's like, oh, you're actually trying to do that. I see. Yeah, that's a bit globalist of you. Okay. Because it's oh no, we just want Rig Road to over to Europe. We connect Amsterdam to Beijing, A to B. It's simple as that. We want roads so good can travel backward and forward. It's that easy. It's good thinking. It's like no, you're trying to literally own everything in between Europe and China, and including Europe and China.
yes. It's an attempt by China to basically create hundreds of Panama canals.
Yeah.
In kind of road and shipping lane form. They have seen some of the economic model. It's really what the British had with the Suez Canal in some ways. It's what the Americans have still with the Panama Canal and things like that.
It broke with the
Uh,
Panama Canal, but yes.
yeah. Well, of course, but it's that kind of thing where they are trying to undergo effective economic imperialism. And with China's kind of surge on the world stage and in terms of presence in the quote unquote international community, they think it is their place and their right to have this clout in other countries. That they are delivering all these goods, they are creating all these things, all this cat mostly, and shipping it to so many places that they think that they should own the infrastructure between point A and point B. and be able to profit off of it, and be able to wield the influence that comes with all of that.
I mean,
But
it's a big move, though, isn't it? Essentially, what was it was sort of like they wanted an 8-lane, maybe much more, or multiple 8-lane highways running straight through from Europe, through Russia, over through to China. The whole route. You know, tunnels, the works, trains, the works, plus shipping lanes. This is to compare it to the Panama Canal. The Panama Canal's minor in comparison. That was a
oh, I know it. It's about the ownership of foreign infrastructure, is what I was talking about.
but it is a massive plan, and you know, hats off to them for thinking they could pull it off. But oh boy, I mean, this is going to require yeah. And they're going to come into some issues with it, and they have done as a result.
I would argue that Belt and Road is 20th century thinking in many ways.
It's a little ambitious, yes.
It was not just ambitious. I think that they're focusing on kind of traditional brick mortar roads presence. Whereas if you look at when we talked about last time with the IMF, what the IMF does, they don't care about that. They actually care about policy. As Klaus Schwab said, we penetrate the cabinets. They care more about the ownership of government and generally an alignment of policy, hegemony, and access to infrastructure, and all those things come with that. They come in time. I think, if anything, China's almost been too honest about it. They've very openly said they're trying to build this Silk Road. You know, it was announced in Kazakhstan. You are right. 2013 was the first time it was really talked about.
Yeah.
But Belt and Road, really, in its current form, I'd say was PR formulated in about 2015, with some of the negative reaction to the term of the Silk Road.
Yeah, just a tad.
Yeah, and a lot of the connotations that come with that.
It is very honest and very open. And yet, at the same time, it isn't, because there's a mindset, there's a technology behind there, which is, and I mentioned it to you in one of the comments, that what they're trying to do is something that's been played around with by a number of people a number of times, which is the supercontinent and 3-island strategy. Which is North America, South America, and Australia are islands, and then the rest of the world is one continent, and it crushes America out at that point. As a power.
They're really thinking about what is the Eurasian Heartland model.
Yeah.
Which certain members of US foreign policy have recently become quite obsessed with, is the Eurasian Heartland model.
I'm not surprised. It's very concerning for America.
It is, and it's also got like really weird, esoteric, old world, Scythian warrior shit attached to it too. There's some, I need to find it. There's some batshit stuff out of some State Department people about the kind of the inner world, the outer world, and what they view as in a kind of a post climate change, whether you believe it's man-made or not, world, that Russia will really be the heartland of the world.
Yeah.
And that a lot of the world will struggle with these cycles and the changes in the earth, whereas Russia will arguably thrive in many ways, and so will a lot of its satellites. There's the thawing of their ports. There's a lot of stuff like that, it's a bigger discussion than this. But Belt and Road has a view towards that. Has a view towards the stands, the Asian stands. Ye olde Mongol territory, places that we would consider forgotten backwaters, because we're so used to what has now become quite unreliable international shipping, which is why some of the Belt and Road stuff has become slightly redundant in recent years because of some of the international shipping collapse. In fact, should we just bring up that first image that just shows kind of what the Belt and Road route is about and what it tries to link together? Yeah, the One Belt, One Road. There's the Maritime Silk Road and the Silk Road Economic Belt Initiative, which make up the Belt and Road. Oh yes, S. Smith. They're very much admitting that Spengler was right about the future. There's some extremely weird Spenglerian stuff happening in the U.S. State Department, which is cuckoo bananas to think about. But that's there are some analysts who very much absorb and have been kind of externalizing that model, which is odd and exciting. Oh, first of all, though, do you want to welcome our audience to the rice field? Since we don't have Alex today, but we have a stand-in.
We do. Oh,
Yeah,
Welcome to the rice field,
people are
motherfucker!
once again enjoying our what I described as our chinkified avatars. There we go.
they're glorious. I don't know what you're talking about. They're absolutely amazing.
Anyway, welcome, folks.
I
It is
might
Watson,
sneak
yes.
her in every now and then.
Welcome to the rice fields, motherfuckers. Oh,
Absolutely adorable.
I do love the original of that, but the Watson version has that extra. It has that edge to it.
Sorry.
Oh no, Kai. A lot of it is about the kind of the idea of the Eurasian Heartland, the supercontinent stuff. It's not like explicitly Spenglerian, but it's the same kind of ideas about like the Heartland, and Russia as seen from that angle as the kind of European Asian supercontinent. It's interesting to see that mindset reiterated there, but they're not explicitly parroting Spengler to disappoint you slightly, but it is from a similar kind of source of ideas. Yes, the Prudentialist does have some good streams on this concept, and I would recommend his streams about icebreakers from about a year ago, and I'd recommend a lot of his geopolitics stuff. But so go on, Trig.
Yeah, because I was going to say, if you believe in global warming, if it is a thing, and if the ice caps are going to melt, as you said, Russia, where is currently Siberia, if that thaws, that is it. Russia has so much north-facing coastline that is easy to create into ports. They have access to the whole world. They have more north-facing coastline than anywhere else in the world. So Russia will turn into just the economic powerhouse it's always had the potential to be, but always kind of failed because so much of it is so fucking cold you can't dig there, and no one wants to live there, and it's just cold, and fuck that, and there's bears there, and weird, crazy Russian mountain people.
Bears, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, as you can see on this map, you see there's the Maritime Silk Road Initiative, which involves Indonesia, Malaysia, Sri Lanka, Kenya, Djibouti, places like that. It also involves South Africa and Zimbabwe to some degree as well now.
Yes.
But it's this idea of trying to directly link China to Europe in a way that China has full control over.
Mhm.
It's also an excuse to invest in all these strategically important countries. A lot of people have described attempted debt traps, which is true in some places. We'll go into some of the effectiveness or ineffectiveness of that later. But first of all, I wanted to tackle to carry on from our stream a couple of weeks ago. I want to talk about the Sri Lankan angle, because it's something that we brought up very briefly in the intro to that stream, but we didn't have time to cover because there was so much IMF stuff to talk about. And I would say that 2010 onwards, the story of Sri Lanka is much more based in the IMF than it is with China, with some notable exceptions, which we'll go into here. But the first one I want to get into here is I'm not sure Business Standard are, but they have one of the less editorialized articles about this. Which is China's Belt and Road spend in Russia, Sri Lanka falls to zero report. Financing and investment were at 28.4 billion in the first 6 months compared to 29.4 billion in the same period last year. So Belt and Road spending has actually overall in aggregate slowed down. But there's no new spending in Russia, Sri Lanka, and Egypt, as they are giving up slightly on some of their the maritime stuff and some of their Maritime Silk Road Initiative, and very much going all in on the Turkish Silk Road route. The reason for Russia is obvious in that Russia is no longer a decent inland route into Europe because of all the sanctions. As soon as you enter into Russia, you can become subject to them as you pass through. You are subject to the Western sanctions. So that has been taken out of the equation for China, at least for now. Even though links between the two have been tightened, it no longer offers this through route to Europe because of the slight balkanization of that area. So we now see that they are moving their investment away somewhat from the Maritime Silk Road, away from Sri Lanka, and away from the Russian aspect of their overland economic belt.
Yeah, I mean, this will change once Russia and Ukraine sort out their little fracas. Not a forever war at all, and in no way, shape, or form a complete and utter clusterfuck, that one. But yeah, once that's sorted out, we will see that change again. No, I have no doubt about it. Russia and China are so heavily tied together at this point, being part of various different trade agreements globally. I don't see this pause in investment being anything other than just a pause. Eventually, it will kick back in. Let's also remember that this is also a route for Russia to get their goods. You know, if they can get their goods to China, they can then, in a roundabout way, sort of ship it round. It's like what we've seen with regards India selling gas to the Western market and
Yes.
oil and so on, which is just Russian fuel. But they've bought it from via China into India, and then selling it onto the West for a profit, and the sanctions have therefore managed to make everybody win apart from the West.
Yeah, they're
Well done,
trading
guys.
indirectly with Moscow, but also for higher prices.
Yes, yes.
It's a very, very bad move, and it is one that has been backfiring. But I wanted to highlight this one because it really shows the general slowdown in Belt and Road spending, but specifically in these areas,
Yep.
Sri Lanka being one of them. I don't know, Trig, how aware you are of some of the Sri Lanka stuff.
Oh, they have absolutely bottomed out. They have taken huge amounts of debt from the WEF, from China for Belt and Road infrastructure, as we saw on the on the map down there in Sri Lanka. They've got a huge port been built. They can't make it work. Sri Lanka is absolutely bankrupt at this point, and are in the middle of what looks like a fairly horrendous regime change, unless things have changed since I last looked at it a couple of days ago.
Well,
It's
it is and it isn't. There is some continuation. But the next link here we have kind of talks about that. It's from, I think it's from an Indian source, which a lot of
yes.
this is actually. You'll notice that a lot of the coverage of Belt and Road and of Sri Lanka specifically has now moved into the English-speaking aspects of the Indian press, since Sri Lanka is since it got used as a story of some sort of popular uprising, has become slightly confusing for people now. So it's really dropped out of the Western press.
Yes.
In fact, China isn't mentioned at all in the Western press, which is kind of why it was absent conspicuously from a lot of the stories we were talking about, because it hasn't been part of this narrative. Here's the story from NDTV. He would usually be as critical of China as possible. They said Sri Lanka crisis to have big impact on Chinese investment and ties. China has so far maintained a conspicuous silence on the fall of the powerful Rajapaksa clan, considered to be the main backers of Chinese investment in the country, which is true, which is now facing its worst economic crisis since independence in 1948. What they're referencing there partly is the fact that Rajapaksa was always backed by Beijing against the Tamil Tigers. And the Tamil Tigers got a lot of funding from India because they are essentially ethnically Indian, many of them, or at least nominally so. But ever since the defeat of the Tamil Tigers, India really hasn't had much of a foothold in Sri Lanka, or at least, outside of its natural ties to that community. Rajapaksa was somebody who was seen as a natural ally of China, and his soft deposition, I would say, he's not exactly been executed in the street. He's not been Gaddafi'd. He's left into relative comfort, but he was seen as China's ally, and this really is a signal that Sri Lanka has fully entered the IMF World Bank sphere of influence. And what we see here going forward has a lot less to do with China. than it did previously. In fact, there's a see if I can find it here. Ah, here we go. It should be one of the next links over, but there's a little map of debt here from DW, which is a German outlet, talking about Sri Lankan foreign debt summary as of end of April 2021 by major lenders in US dollars, which is linking quite nicely with this. I'll read a little bit more of this one in a sec, but this is very important. Sri Lanka's main borrowing has come from the international money markets. They have generally borrowed money via private institutions, investment, through their own bonds and loans. They have 2% from India, 9% from other sources, 9% from the World Bank. I'd say the IMF is conspicuously absent from this diagram. They may have included that in market borrowings. China is 10%. In fact, China, Japan, and the World Bank have exactly the same investment. And then the Asian Development Bank, which is jointly run really by America and Japan, although Japan is a minor partner in that. I would say that for those in the know, the Asian Development Bank really is an American project. That carries 13%, which is their biggest kind of international institutional lender. So we see that China here is only 10% of Sri Lankan foreign debt at the moment.
Yeah,
which
equal to Japan, which
yes,
significant size difference in mass. Then again, Japan not insignificant financially.
no.
By any stretch of the imagination.
But in terms of policy, unfortunately, Japan, in terms of international and foreign policy, is still very much vacillated by the US.
Yes, and they're very standoffish, and they will do whatever the Americans would want them to do. And other than that, they will pretty much stay quiet.
I know we lost Shinzo Abe recently. He was seen as unusual for speaking out against some of the kind of denigration of Japan in a historical context.
Yeah.
But in terms of foreign policy, he was actually still very, very compliant. It's interesting just how unradical in certain aspects, despite his reputation, Shinzo Abe was. But here we see really that despite talks of a Chinese debt trap, despite talks of the mass influence of China in Sri Lanka, a lot of that is historic. Sri Lanka now, despite being a Belt and Road country, and despite, as we'll see later, having a port taken off them by China, really, although it's a slightly more complex situation than that, is not as indebted to China as it once was. Its main lenders now are Western lenders, and the main power brokers there now are people like the IMF.
Yeah.
It's very interesting to see its relevance has waned in terms of Belt and Road, but its relevance seems to have skyrocketed in terms of experimental IMF states. As we talked about last time, it's been used almost as like a petri dish for some of the World Economic Forum stuff. Disastrously so, as we've seen. A lot of the green, anti-fertilizer, organic revolution initiative stuff completely failed in Sri Lanka. But despite its resembling somewhat the Four Pests campaign, ironically, which was the opposite, the use of pesticides to basically kill off the sparrow, which led to disastrous results in China. It's the reduction of yields via the reduction of chemical fertilizer was brought about not by Chinese intervention, but largely by Western propaganda, essentially.
Yes, it's all the green initiative. They're trying to push it over here. We're seeing the same thing essentially happening in the Netherlands at the moment. Farmers kicking off over the same issues. You cannot go have high yield.
Well, there's an article here from
use this grain, use this crop. Therefore, you need to use this fertilizer. You must meet these targets for years, 20, 30, 40 years of that, and then to all of a sudden go, no, you can't do that. You've got to change. And by the way, if you can't make that, the debts you've got to sell to our friend Bill Gates over here. Of course they're going to kick off, and this is what's happened over there. Not maybe with Bill Gates, but yeah, you can't just suddenly go, oh well, we're green now, you must change because reasons which are not actually backed up on with any sort of level of science.
Well, compare the article we just read there from NDTV to this DW article from 2010, which I have here, which is entitled "China, Sri Lanka's in quotes, well, in scare quotes, really, unconditional ally."
Yes.
This is from just after the end of the Tamil Tigers War, and arguably kind of marks the recent high water mark of the relationship between China and Sri Lanka before Sri Lanka started really looking more to the West for its investment as it became a more and more debt-dependent nation. This is really, again, at the beginning of China starting to experiment with economic imperialism and the beginnings of what will become the Belt and Road. But it goes on to say China has not only become one of Sri Lanka's key trade partners and a major military ally, but it has helped the South Asian country counter Western pressure on issues such as human rights. It's kind of ironic reading this now after the stuff we talked about last week, which is in 2015. You saw Tony Blair stepping in to try and rehabilitate Sri Lanka's, try and rehabilitate Sri Lanka's image in Western nations after it became much more open to Western investment. You had this period, kind of 2010, I'd say, to 2015, where Sri Lanka was a bit of a bad strongman pariah state, whereas the rhetoric towards it softened to the degree that in 2019, I think it was, or maybe in 2018, but recently, it had these very soft puff pieces written about it in on the World Economic Forum's website. It went from kind of nightmare human rights state into what was described by the UN as a model developing nation, which is funny now, but it's interesting looking back at this. Yeah, it says it's been a year since Sri Lanka's army secured victory over the Tamil Tiger rebels. China helped Sri Lanka's state immensely with the war on the Tamil Tigers. It talks again about countering India and the fact that this really the Chinese connection back then in 2010 allowed them to counter Indian influence, which was nominally still pro Tamil Tigers, and the fact that they were able to use it as an emerging market in terms of tea, natural rubber, blah blah blah, cash crops basically. This article, again, it is a moment in time, but what it's talking about, as we saw with the previous article, simply isn't true anymore. There isn't really this unconditional ally relationship between Sri Lanka and China. As we've seen, China's been almost completely silent on this issue as Sri Lanka has collapsed. And supposedly one of its major economic partners, or at least from its rhetoric 10 years ago.
They're just slowly backing away. It's literally Homer Simpson sinking back into the hedge meme.
Yes.
Of course, because they this is like, oh, okay, bad debts here. Yeah, we're still friends and everything, but is that the time? I think it's my dinner. I'll be right back. And they're just fucking melting into the hedge on the spot. No, nothing to see here. I've got nothing. I'm having nothing to do with this. I ain't touching that, Jack.
Well, since we've reached the Sri Lankan food issue again, we should probably welcome people to the rice fields once more. Since our viewership, I think, has basically doubled since we last welcomed them.
Welcome to the rice field, motherfucker!
Take it away, Watson. I don't know, that clip will never not be funny.
It's gorgeous. I love it.
It's so good.
For a second there, you lost me when the moment you mentioned Tony Blair. I went into a good 45-second hate spiel in my head whilst I was busy swearing and cursing the man.
Yeah, we talked about it last week, but you see him announce this partnership, and immediately these puff pieces from the Tony Blair Institute. He's everywhere. We keep finding him. He's like some sort of international relations cockroach. You can't stamp him out.
No.
You just, yeah.
That's a really good way of describing him. Yeah. International relations cockroach is about right. You know when people celebrated Margaret Thatcher's death, I must admit at the time I was all, that's in bad taste. But to be perfectly honest, when Tony Blair dies, I'm going to be fucking pissed up dancing in the street with a flare in both hands. Telephone pole. No, Plasma. No, Rob. No. Small nails so it hurts, and telephone pole kills them too quickly.
Oh, the oldie telephone pole.
Yeah.
The old open reach method. I'm sorry. The links that I put in there are a little bit out of order, but there's one here from News 18 I want to tackle next, which is entitled "Chinese Snub to Rajapaksa: A Lesson for Pro-China Leaders Across the World." Because I think this is an Indian source.
Which was that? The Economic Times, India Times.
It's the News 18 one, actually.
News
which is
18
another
one.
Indian.
Okay.
Yes, a Chinese snub. And the thing is, it's a little bit slanted, obviously, from that direction. A little bit slanted. Yes, news on China is generally a little bit slanted. If you'll excuse the pun. Oh, is it trying to make you disable your ad block and stuff?
You know what? I would disable my ad block briefly.
Don't do it, Trig. I'll send you an archive. I'll send you. Don't listen to him, Trig. I don't know why it picks yours up, but it's not picking mine up.
It's okay. It's only I've got like 3 ad blockers running on this browser.
You want to make sure they're not conflicting with each other.
Yeah.
Oh no, wait. The archive website's being a bit slow. We'll just do it this way. Well, yeah, Chinese snub. The Rajapaksa family rulers have faced a disgraceful exit from power. Former Sri Lanka Prime Minister Rajapaksa and former Finance Minister, the other Rajapaksa, have already resigned amidst angry protests in the island nation. They really go on to discuss the fact that China has been very pragmatic through all of this. They've realized that their investment in Sri Lanka has essentially gone bad, and they're not willing to invest political capital to really try and enter the fray with this. They're basically telling the WEF and the IMF they can have it, that they consider Sri Lanka they're not going into the sunk cost fallacy there. they're very much just, again, you're right, they're quietly disappearing back into the hedge. And what they're doing is they are cutting their losses and really accepting the fact that their man is gone and Sri Lanka is, as we entitled last stream, a bit of an IMF vassal state now. But it's probably almost a Pyrrhic victory for the West, in that really the country has had to be brought so low for them to get rid of Rajapaksa and get rid of the Chinese influence as they see it there. As we mentioned again in the intro to the last stream, which I think a lot of people missed when they talked about us not talking about China, which we did, is really it can be seen as a bit of a proxy war between China and the West in Sri Lanka, but I think one where the West may have overestimated Sri Lanka's importance and may end up doing what China has done in the previous 10 years and throwing good money after bad.
Oh, I guarantee it. It's one of those places. I'm not gonna judge them too harshly, but I would suggest that there's a lot of corruption, a lot of nonsense, and you throw a large amount of money in there, and a very small percentage of it actually ends up going to where it's supposed to, and only subpar goods are bought with that money. So we'll water down the concrete extra week. So we've got the same amount that we said we were going to buy, but I get an extra 30% backhander into my pocket in the process type deal. It's very, very common. It was common in Spain. The EU had all manner of problems with Spain and Italy doing this sorts of things. If Spain and Italy are doing it, I'm pretty certain Sri Lanka and India and all sorts of other places are doing the same sort of thing. So they don't play the same games as we do.
No. We have a donation there. Thank you for the £2 there, Merc. He says, Tony Blair, George Bush, what's the difference? I'm Potato,
Actually,
potato,
actually,
tomato, tomato.
about 30 IQ points, but they're both on the same sort of level of evil. Oh no, actually George Bush Senior. Fair enough. Yeah, George Bush Junior definitely was not the brightest spark, but Tony Blair. I won't say I won't say the man's dumb. He was not dumb.
No.
He is pure evil, but he's a bright spark. He is, but
He is one of the Machiavellians.
yes.
He is someone I think we can identify in a forward-facing role, because a lot of these people aren't in forward-facing roles. There is this like next level mover and shaker. Tony Blair is one of the people who very much is in power internationally and has never left power. He's only like ascended. It's very, if you strike me down, I become more powerful than you can ever imagine. There's some arguments that we should have kept him in British politics as containment, because at least he can only ruin Britain. But we have a couple more donations here. Thank you for the two $3 donations, Chloe. He says our Belt and Road campaign is a way to control trade through infrastructure and debt. Yep, it uses the U.S. military guarding trade lanes to their advantage. Also, it's just globalism. Yeah, it is just globalism, but Chinese dominated. We'll get into that later. China is having economic problems right now, so many don't want to bring up the bad news till China has stabilized, because heavy investments in China. I'm sure the IMF, WF, and general globalists want them in the fold, so they're light on criticism. Yes, again, this is another point. You're slightly preempting us here. We'll get into further on as we talk about some of China's, both its sovereign debt crisis and its international debt crisis, that the West is actually being very, very accommodating with and a little bit worried about. Because, spoiler alert, they're all on the same team, really.
Absolutely. That whole plan I was talking about earlier about the three island single continent. The EU, the AU, they're all part of the same sort of scheme, essentially. In my opinion.
Oh no, they are. There's a lot of documents. It's like the
Oh, yeah.
stuff that you read before the War on Terror. There's a lot of these policy documents where China is posited in this one world economy as like the manufacturing zone of the world. Like China will manufacture. It will be the manufacturer. Ukraine will be the wheat zone. It will grow wheat.
Yes.
There's all these like weird central planning, not even having like monolithic towns or districts or counties or states, but having monolithic countries that are dedicated to one industry. And it's like economic planners' wet dream, and that they have this idea that they're going to create this world that is so simple that it is much easier to manage than the complexity of the real world. But it is a complete fantasy.
It's horrendous. It's idiots that none of them know what it takes to be a farmer. None of them know what it's like to be a manufacturer, and they're all a bunch of Bullingdon Club, toffs that think they know and are dividing stuff up like it's Total War game. Yeah.
Yes.
The wheat fields, indeed.
We've had another $2 donation there from
Chloe,
Glow in the Dark, saying Tony Blair, the Dark Lord. Yes, we have mentioned the Dark Lord again. Oh dear. Yeah, but it's interesting that the Chinese have kind of snubbed their man. The more mature the Chinese economic imperialist efforts get, the more they resemble the US, actually, because the US used to do this all the time, in that they would support a strong man, and when it suited their interest not to, they would simply turn their back and pretend they never did, and allow this horrendous chaos to take place.
Oh, you mean like Saddam Hussein? What am I
Yes.
saying? Saddam Hussein was never an ally of the Western countries. That anything in the 80s were a myth. That never happened. Yeah. And they're going to do the same thing. It's convenient. And China are going to play the same game, and the West is going to continue playing the same game. I mean, let's not be fair. We used to be in support of Assad as well.
We did. Well, Assad was very much our guy.
Yeah.
I'm trying to find one more link here.
Then they found oil in the Golan Heights. I'm sure that had nothing to do with it.
Well, it became the next vector of chaos, and then he wasn't our ally anymore, which has become a damn shame for Syria. But he's still there. He managed to survive the onslaught of all the fake stuff. We'll eventually return to the forever wars, the CIA links, the Mossad links, things like that. We could do with having some sort of Syria special at some point, since Syria has very much disappeared into a news black hole in the last 4 years.
Yes.
To an extreme degree, ever since the Russians had a very, very successful campaign there, and essentially stamped out the CIA and Israel-led fake good rebels in quotes that were actually just ISIS. And we have, the thing is, there's proof of all this. When it disappeared out the headlines, all the stuff, they just stopped guarding it. Like, it all just came out. There is so much solid proof about both Israel and America funding ISIS. Or, in their propaganda, it's, we funded groups that then, no, we didn't know they were going to join ISIS, but they funded ISIS. It was a creation of those two agencies.
Oh yeah,
but we'll cover that properly at some point. We don't want to get too off topic here.
No, but you're right. So, Syria will spill back in. In fact, I tell you now, Ukraine will spill over into Syria somehow. That's my prediction for next year. And
there's an article here from The Diplomat, which is along the same veins as the one we just read. But again, I think this is from a slightly more Indian perspective. But it's just entitled Sri Lanka overestimates its importance to China.
Yes. I've got that.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yep, India is a massive market that's great potential. If letting go of Sri Lanka allows China to improve its relationship with India, it will, which is a very good point, in that China has been, ever since that farcical border confrontation in which both sides had soldiers almost purely die of exposure, it was so embarrassing.
You don't fight over the Himalayas. It's a terrible place to fight.
Well, they weren't even fighting. They were just shouting at each other, and people fell off the hill. It's quite literally what happened. They got overexcited, forgot how cold it was, and there was all these reports of border skirmish, 15 dead, and they'd all fallen down, go boom, and died of exposure in the Himalayas because they're fucking conscripts and their collective IQ is about 12. If you've not read up on that, just look up. A lot of the sources are very dramatic, but if you cut through a lot of the editorializing, the China-India border conflict near the Himalayas was it needs the Benny Hill theme put to it, basically. It was very, very inept from both ends there. But this is getting at the point that we were talking about earlier, in that since China is abandoning some of its naval Silk Road stuff, Sri Lanka really is the first place that gets dropped on that, because they are not as an essential stopping off point if China's relationship with India is improved, if they are able to use Indian ports more. And what's actually caused this, despite the war in Ukraine cutting off some of their trade routes through Russia, it's really driven India into the hands of China and Russia.
Yeah.
Who they get a lot of their defense equipment from. And India is very skittish about its reliance on the West. India has started to realize that America especially is an unreliable international partner, especially when it comes to defense. And India is really looking to forge its own path in the same vein as China. Therefore, the conflict, even talking about the economic stuff, which India is very, very, very against the sanctions because it would affect them greatly. India has been driven into the arms of China and Russia. Yes. And with India being closer to China and Russia, Sri Lanka is leagues less important if India and China are no longer at each other's throats in some ways.
Well, India and China, I mean, apart from having their border skirmishes, I mentioned this earlier with you, is there's this BRICS movement that's been going off. I think it's been going on since early 2010, maybe a little bit before that. In fact,
Yes.
and that's sort of Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa as well, which is a huge chunk of the population of the world, and they're doing a sort of long distance EU type of thing with it, or at least having a crack, more ECC, more European Economic Community kind of sort of idea of free trade and mutual trade agreements between these five countries. And that, as you say, yeah, that plus a few other things is pushing China further and further into, or rather India rather, further and further into the grips of China. They make strange
Yes.
bedfellows because they've been at each other's throat for a long, long time. But nonetheless, there they are. In fact, you know what? I've got a. This is a mad picture. This is just a. It's just a.
If they added Germany to the mix, they could be Hans bricks. But no. Fuck you, Hans bricks.
Hold on, let's just give you this image.
The BRICS aspect is interesting because America recently has highly alienated Brazil under Bolsonaro. They have made concerted efforts to back attempts to oust him. So I'd argue really that in the post-Ukraine world, the BRICS countries are possibly closer than they have been in the last 10 years.
Yeah.
Again, though, a lot of these countries, as Glow in the Dark praised out, the CCP has praised the World Economic Forum because they're both centralizing powers. And we must remember that Belt and Road, despite being tutted at by a lot of the Western countries, plays into their hands as well because they can exploit it. You can't have the situation where the WEF, the IMF, and the World Bank comes in and effectively cleans up in Sri Lanka without China stepping in first and then stepping back. It's a 1-2 punch in which these small countries are forced to go to, or feel forced to go to, one or the other, and whoever wins, they all win. Because when they're playing them off against each other, or when the countries think that they're playing them off against each other, you either end up in the hands of China or you end up in the hands of the IMF. And because of these negative debt cycles that both China and the IMF seem to create in these countries, it ends up become self-perpetuating, and you end up with like vacillating vassals, if you'll excuse the wordplay there, in which these vassal states go back and forth between being on China's teat and being on the West's teat. And what really happens is that they just become domestically weaker, and both of them are able to come to the table and carve up these countries between them. That is how the globalist cake, gets baked.
Yes.
That is how the pie is made. That's what they do. And even though they may seem to be enemies in certain aspects, really they do come to the table and play ball when it matters. I've mentioned before that China still has American black sites. It's still become one of the places that America sends people if it wants them to disappear.
Yes.
That's been the case for quite a while now. It used to be Syria.
Yes, it did, didn't it? Yeah. No, and Black Dobbin makes a very good point as well, which is China is indeed very water scarce, and improved relationships with India makes them, or allows them to get water, basically glacial waters from Tibet and other places.
Yes.
In the Himalayas much more recently, and it really is. I've spent for no particular reason whatsoever. Some friends and I, were you there when we were trying to find the most scarce Chinese restaurant ever? We found a Chinese restaurant in the middle of nowhere that was.
We found a lithium mine.
Unrelated to absolutely anything. It was like 6,000. I thought it was a couple of thousand miles away from anywhere. And then when we zoomed in, there was a massive city-sized lithium mine right there.
Nothing else on the maps. The town next to it had been obviously removed from the maps, but some idiot had put his little Chinese restaurant on Google Maps in a place that isn't supposed to exist, and that was fascinating. That we found this like massive, supposed like semi-secret lithium mine in China.
It was literally, if I remember right, it was close to sort of 50 miles end to end. Including the tributary rivers and canals that were being pumped in there to do the water lakes and the salt flats there.
Yeah, those of you who don't know, lithium mining and refining is incredibly water intensive. Yeah, Gitmo is still open, but Yep. Nice
Gitmo's
reminder for you.
Gitmo's second tier. It's
tame.
It's tame. Gitmo's basically a freaking resort
That's
in
the
comparison
Area
to some of the
51 of Torture Black Sites.
Yeah.
It's the one. It's the one everyone talks about. You know.
Yeah. You want a
It's
real
not-
Torture
not the
Black
real
site,
shit.
no one knows about it. And you
You know,
don't come
it's-
back and people do not talk about it, because if they do, they get to visit it firsthand. And then they don't come back either. So no, Gitmo is Las Vegas, in comparison to the real ones. But yeah, no, that lithium that mine was quite a trip. I must go and one of these days I'm going to pick up some Szechuan from that place. Ah, dear, that was a weird day. It's like, holy shit, what's this? It's huge. Really is. Anyway, sorry, I shooting off at tangents again from weird little projects in the distant past.
Oh, there we go. I think I probably put too many links in about this port now, because I was trying to find this link here, about the fact that back in 2018, what happened is that Sri Lanka, in order to settle certain debts, Sri Lanka handed over one of its port cities to China to pay off part of its debt. But they signed over Hambantota. I can't say that word. Signed over the Beijing on 99-year lease because Sri Lanka cannot pay Chinese loans it took out to build the port in the first place.
Hambantota?
Yeah, maybe.
Really?
The wider story of this, though, is the fact that this port was a Chinese project that was funded by China. The loans themselves were already kind of bad loans because it was taking a bit of a loss leader on this. And what happened is Sri Lanka was losing money hand over fist on this underutilized port. So they gave the lease to China, and it almost turned out to be somewhat of a poison pill, in that the port itself was always a white elephant. The Chinese investment was bad investment. And yes, they've got a port out of it, but they've got a useless port that's losing money. And we start to see some of the ground level stuff about why the Belt and Road Initiative has been a bit of a dud. It's been a bit of a failure for China, because what they've done is they've done what all centralized planned economies have done, and that they've thrown good money after bad. They've created these massive infrastructure projects with these huge initial outlays without thinking about the utility of them and without obviously the market demand there for it. And the Sri Lankan port, despite it being a very scary headline and making it look like China is robbing land from Sri Lanka, which it kind of did. It did take a little bit of landmass from them on a lease, but it did so because it had lost so much from its project, and then the project was so bad that even getting it for free, essentially, Sri Lanka was still losing money trying to run this thing. So Beijing took over their port to lift some of the financial burden from their partner. It was probably a net gain for Sri Lanka to hand over this port, because one, they get debt forgiveness, and two, it stops them hemorrhaging money. It's quite an interesting case study here of what happens when the Belt and Road Initiative underperforms and underdelivers. You end up with these long-running headaches in which you get this essentially Chinesium infrastructure that is useless. There is no demand for, and the Belt and Road, I think there's a couple more links later we talk about, all of the initiatives, the shopping centers, the glittering skyscrapers in the middle of nowhere, they're very Chinese, and they're all white elephants.
Yeah. And if I remember rightly, not exactly built to standard. A lot of subpar equipment used, supplied by China as well. It's another one of their dam projects where you've got it's all been a bit cheap. I remember the thing in because they had this problem in Africa where the building works and the stuff they were doing in Africa really backfired on them. And in fact, we're going to talk about Nigeria in a little bit. But these do not work out well for them. But you know, they as you say, they Chinesium it. You end up with trash bag concrete blocks or trash bag filled concrete blocks. I dread to think, this port may be operating to capacity and that it doesn't work and isn't used.
Well, it's another example of, on the surface of it, China looks incredibly powerful here. It looks like they're bullying Sri Lanka around. It looks like they're in charge and Sri Lanka is their vassal state. But really, the story is of unwise meddling that is throwing everyone into chaos. It's not good for Sri Lanka. It's not good for China, really.
Ooh.
And that's the case with all of this non-market intervention. There's no demand, and they're just playing. They're playing superpower without really knowing what they're doing, and it's creating the situation that when the trade lanes shift, when shipping becomes less important and overland becomes a bit more important, when you have some of the chaos that's going on, you lose routes into Europe through Russia, and your sea routes become a little less useful because of the way that shipping has gone. You control a worthless trade route. You join up dots on a map, and though assuming that those dots will always be relevant, but the nature of trade is that the routes are fluid, and there's new trade routes and new roundabout routes and new profitability kind of aspects coming up all over the place, and you can't predict that. Again, it's very 20th century Chinese planned economy thinking, but on a global scale, and it just doesn't interface with reality.
It really doesn't. And anyone that's dealt with planning trade in any way, shape, or form, and let's just start with a small company, shall we say? Okay, I need products A, B, and C so that I can put them together through, stick it through process D, E, and F, and I'm going to end up with product Z out of it. And A, B, and C is currently coming from China, but suddenly, Colombia and Brazil, chime up and go, actually, we can produce this much cheaper, and we can get it to you for half the price. And the road that we've been building from China to deliver A, B, and C is suddenly no longer needed. And this is exactly what they're doing. They're building an infrastructure in a world where flight and sea is such a massive part of freight, especially in a just-in-time sort of environment, which we are, even though we had the massive economic crisis that really put a right spanner in the works of just-in-time delivery. People still want just enough product to make the gears turn for another week, and they want it tomorrow, and they want it to last them for another week, and then they'll take another delivery in a week's time. And that's the way that businesses work these days, because it means they don't have to have huge storage. It means they don't have to have huge financial outlay for huge amounts of products in the first place, and so on and so forth. And just in time means you don't need this kind of infrastructure. Sure, if you're shipping huge amounts of concrete and oil and so on, yes, but if you're in the rubber dog shit sort of business, which China is, it's not what's required. If you're producing, I don't know, cheap widget that is a quarter of the price of an American or European produced widget, but is going to last a third of the time, but etc., and you're just going to undercut the market and give people cheap crap. That's China's game. That's not huge mass haulage. That's not the game that they're building infrastructure for. And I don't really see. I think that you're right. They're playing a game that was 100 years old. 50 years ago. It was a failure back in World War II when they were trying to play this type of game. It was already an out of date philosophy, or just about to be out of date. And in this day and age, they've got the wrong mindset. Planned economy is every single business person and expert that actually works within business strategy knows that government centralized planned economies are the worst fucking thing possible. They do not work ever. All they ever do is collapse and cause more problems. And governments just never government people will never get it through their head, because they just want government must grow. must have more government. Big government must be bigger. Government must be bigger, more tax from people. Therefore, need reason to be bigger. It's a nightmare. The whole lot of them, they all deserve a lamppost of their own.
A lamppost of my very own.
Yeah, exactly.
To do some of the chronology stuff here, there's an NPR link from 2019 called "In Sri Lanka, China's building spree is raising questions about sovereignty," which actually comes across slightly funny after Sri Lanka's essential default and exit, where China may be left holding the bag for much of this. They talk about corruption. They talk about the 1.5 billion $1.5 billion business district that China's built. They talk about some of the local corruption as well. Yeah. Many in the US and Indian officials decry the port that we talked about earlier as an example of Chinese debt diplomacy. Some Sri Lankan observers say their country's politicians are more to blame. Corruption allegedly facilitated the deals and ultimately delivered the port into Chinese hands. Whilst all this is true, and whilst it is bad what China was trying to do, they've effectively failed now that Sri Lanka's become a failed investment. They will never see that money again. They've spent billions attempting to debt trap a country that will never pay its debts, and will probably be bailed out by the West in return for fealty. The NPR article now looks slightly hollow in what's happened, and it assumes that Sri Lanka will continue on the trajectory of being a cash cow for China, rather than Belt and Road spending there essentially falling on its arse, which is what's happened. It's something that a lot of people who have hyped up China as an international powerhouse and enemy have really misjudged when you look at Belt and Road now. There's been all this hype about China as an international superpower, and I think really China is more of a paper tiger than we even assumed a few years ago. I've always been skeptical of the rise of China, of the dominance of China. They've always been in real danger of sovereign debt crises and international debt crises. But we're now seeing what's happened is that a lot of their spending and a lot of their supposed empire building has been borderline naive in some places. They haven't realized that these incompetent tin pot countries very much can play them back and then fall on the mercy of the Western money markets and the IMF to try and plug the holes again, and say, "Oh, evil China, we're not paying your debts, evil China." I'm not saying that China is the good guy here. They're not.
No.
They're just a slightly more incompetent bad guy in this instance. They have been outplayed
in this
by the
particular
West.
case. Yeah,
Yes.
they're used to playing politics within themselves. China has spent literally thousands of years playing politics within China. Global politics is a very, very new game to China, and
especially modern geopolitics.
Yeah,
yes.
and they've always been on the losing stick of it until recently, because even after the Second World War, there were the communism happened, and then they got isolated off, and they were happy sitting there being isolated, having their one child policy. Oh no, we've got no women left. Oh no, everyone's gay now. And as I've mentioned in chat, going back to the money they're spending, honestly, what is a few billion to a company or a country that can print their own money and will happily paint lead bricks gold and go, look, we have all this gold. Look, we're backing our currency with gold, and they're just con artists. They have been playing. I can't believe we've been buying this crap for so long. I mean, most of us haven't, but we've just been looking at it going, why are people playing this game? And they're playing this game because China produces cheap shit cheaply and en masse.
Well, China is being set up as the rival but also ally. It's being set up as almost like a post-Cold War Russia was in terms of its reintegration into the world. There's all this stuff about how we need to tolerate China because it's so powerful and it's inevitable. The rise of China is inevitable. It's drummed into people that China's superpower status is inevitable. That is a narrative in the West. And if we were truly enemies of China, and if China truly was an existential threat to us, surely that wouldn't be the line of propaganda. That the Chinese superpower is inevitable. I mean, there was loads of Western media. If you look at 2008 to about I'd say about 2015, really, a lot of Western fiction was always going on about the fact that there's going to be a Chinese-dominated future. It's one of the tropes in Looper, if you've ever seen that film. Hell, it's one of the tropes in Firefly.
It's also it's a good trope in some. So there's been some wonderful Chinese propaganda sort of takes in South Park as well.
Yes.
Always go to South Park for certainly pre-season 16. Always go to South Park for a good dose of what's actually going off. It is always bang on the mark. Got a bit. Lately it's been a bit. Yes.
Well, there's another link here for the BBC, actually. This is pretty recent. This is from late June. It's the G7 talking about a $600 billion plan to rival China's Belt and Road.
Yes.
And this is what I'm talking about when we talk about the dialectic here. They're pretending to combat. It's like China is partaking in economic imperialism. Therefore, we, as the liberal democratic West, need to engage in more economic imperialism. It's like, what? I'm not quite sure that's what it means. And it's a wink and a nod towards each other. It's very much like what a lot of the Cold War stuff was. It's like, well, Russia has these amazing aircraft, it's spending all this money, and we need to up our military budgets and blah 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 blah. And it's all kind of a wink and a nod between each other. That the West will combat China and China will combat the West, but really the rivalry and the race to the bottom in terms of policy benefits both sides. It's not something that gets talked about very often, but you need the enemy there, and China, I think, is being propped up as an enemy more than it actually really is in reality. There is not the enmity there that they would have you think. In fact, both initiatives like to feed into each other. This will again likely be another case of them carving up the spoils between each other. More economic imperialism is never a good thing. But economic imperialism framed as a red meat way of fighting China appeals to Western neoconservatives. Really, it's something to feed to the telegraph readers. It's something that a lot of people will celebrate. Look, we're taking on China. We need to take on China, guys. We need to go out there and we need to do some more economic imperialism because China's doing it, so we need to do more of it. And they're all laughing together at their conferences, shaking hands behind our backs, and that's always what's going to be happening.
Yes. God, Boris's face in that picture is killing me. He looks like he's desperately trying such a not. I don't know whether Biden's just farted and shat himself again or what.
Yes. Aurelius Nautius Caesar there with the $5 saying it's like Japan was perceived to be the dominant economic power in the 80s.
Yes.
Kind of, but I would argue that China's in much more trouble than Japan got into. Japan got into a stagflation cycle and essentially suffered almost like a liberal democracy economic heat death. In that it really reached the limits of GDP planning and ended up in a malaise, a slow malaise spiral. Whereas China, with its false economy, its planned economy, its completely fantastical currency markets, is rife for a complete implosion. At some point, China is going to spectacularly implode and possibly balkanize.
Oh, that would be something.
That's my opinion, but
a balkanized China would be something.
I think it's possible. I think that there's enough trouble stored up with essentially what has been like a second Great Leap Forward that could happen. It's very much playing up China in a way that allows you to engage in the same behaviors, whilst also kind of carving up this almost like second scramble for Africa. I'll read a little bit of this though. G7 leaders have detailed a plan to mobilize $600 billion in funding for developing world in a move seen as a counter to China's Belt and Road Plan. The partnership with the Global Infrastructure Initiative, the Partnership for Global Infrastructure Investment relaunches a scheme unveiled at last year's G7 talk in England. China's multi-trillion-dollar infrastructure initiative is criticized for hitting nations with too much debt. I want to be clear, this isn't aid or charity, Mr. Biden said. It's an investment that will deliver returns for everyone. Again, they're saying it's the same thing, though. It's like, well, all these countries have too much Chinese debt, so we need to get them into more Western debt. Yay! Got a few more donations here, sorry. Glowy donated $5 and said the great Chinese victory in the Himalayas against the Indian Republic. 100k Indians held the Chinese territory in high ground against 102k Chinese. Chinese bravely chased away Indians with spears. 85k Indians dead and 80k Chinese died. Half the losses from cannibalism. I'm not sure when that was, but I think that's a joke. And another donation for $3. Glowy donated and said, even if China is nothing but scams as long as even if China is nothing but scams as long as the Western banks, companies, and governments act like it's legit. China will always be an economic power. USSR was more of a real threat, but than China is by itself. I'm sorry, that's a bit weirdly formatted there. And JD donated $2 and said, if Three Gorges collapses, it's game over for China.
Yes, it is.
Part of me's remembering the Three Gorges meme with the dog, because that's hilarious. The Schlorp meme. Let me see if I can get that one, because it's so good. Oh, no, Google image search isn't working right now. There's a great meme with like the dog Schlorp meme, and it's a dog drinking the Three Gorges, and it's very funny. Schlorp, Schlorp, Schlorp. Yes.
I've just literally had a thing ping up going. There's a U.S. aircraft carrier and strike groups on their way to contested waters around Taiwan. At the present moment.
Yeah, and a whole bunch of F-15s. A whole bunch of F-18s blew off the deck of the aircraft carrier. They've lost a bunch of planes. They've already had losses.
Oh no. Yeah, because Nancy Pelosi's going to Taiwan, and China have gone rare about it.
A lot of that is distraction, though. Nothing's going to happen.
Of course,
it's a lot of chest beating. China's going to make its protest, but Nancy Pelosi doesn't matter. She doesn't know where she is. She's like 110.
I don't know.
Than Biden.
I don't know. She's good enough to be able to give her husband some fairly spicy stock market tips. She's I think.
Oh, that's her people. She's got a staff basically. I think that whole is China going to invade Taiwan? I think that's a whole massive geopolitical distraction.
No,
I don't think anything's going to kick off there.
It would be wild. I mean, that would be World War III, literally, at that point.
I don't think it would. I think the West would fold like so much laundry. I don't think that they have. I think that they would sacrifice Taiwan because China is their guy.
Well, you know what they wouldn't have in the past, but recently I hear tell that they have basically transported an awful lot of the microchip making facilities out of Taiwan, and now that Taiwan is they have backups elsewhere, shall we say? Because Taiwan's main strategic raison d'être, shall we say, is producing microchips.
Yeah, I don't think even if they wanted to, they'd be able to take it. It's not worth doing, and Taiwan is slowly coming back into China's closer orbit anyway. They've had a lot of pro-Chinese victories there, unfortunately. And again, I think China retaking Taiwan and the West not doing anything, which I don't think it would, really. I don't think it would do anything of consequence anyway. I think that would be too much of a hat tip that really the whole enmity with Chinese is a little bit fake. Because it is a little bit fake, but again, I don't think it will get to that point because I don't think anything's going to happen. I'm not sure they'll try and reintegrate Taiwan fully that quickly. I think they're trying to boil the frog on that one. But we had the Asian Development Bank thing up quickly. Let's talk about some of the wider context stuff then. We've answered the super chats and
Yes.
stuff. You guys have been very generous today, though. Thank you. We've got here. Oh yeah, Bernard Cribbins died, which is quite sad. I quite like Bernard Cribbins.
Yeah, he's a legend of the English 80s sort of movies and stuff. Yeah, no.
He's a legend of like UK broadcasting in general. He's one of those ubiquitous character actors that really only found greater fame and recognition in later life when he became very beloved on Doctor Who, which was unfortunately quite a crappy show by that point. But he did get some more of the recognition he deserved, which was quite good to see, actually, quite heartening. But anyway, do you want to read a bit of this one, Trig?
Yes, which one are we on?
China reckons you've got the right one up. Yeah.
I've got the right one up. Okay, yeah. The Belt and Road Initiative has seen a surge in loans going bad, prompting Beijing to issue countries with emergency credit.
Yeah, they're trying to back up their investments, which is again, it's funny, and they are reckoning with a real overseas debt crisis there.
Yep, and so we've got some nice pictures. Oh yeah, that's the Lotus Tower, the 350-meter Lotus Tower that looms over the skyline of Sri Lanka's capital, Colombo, is one of the tallest buildings in South Asia. Funded by a Chinese state bank and designed to look like a giant lotus bud, is about to burst into flower. It was intended to be a metaphor for the flourishing Sri Lankan economy and the brilliant future of the bilateral cooperation between Beijing and Colombo. Instead, the tower has become a symbol of the mounting problems facing China's overseas lending scheme, the Belt and Road Initiative. The construction suffered from lengthy delays and an allegation of corruption levelled by Sri Lanka's then president. No, get fucked, I'm not saying that. Against one of the Chinese contractors. See? Chinese contractors, you can't trust them. Utter nonsense. Now, 3 years after its official launch, the tower's amenities, including a shopping mall, conference centre, and several restaurant stands, either unfurnished or largely unused, while outside in the street, outrage over Sri Lanka's financial mismanagement has boiled over into popular protests. Which are often... Yes.
Kind of.
A bit. Sort of.
Well, it's almost like it's very skyscraper curse, if you guys are aware of the skyscraper curse. And the biggest skyscrapers are always built before the biggest recessions, and they're built at the height of false cheap money. You can only build record-breaking skyscrapers with very foolish market conditions, and they're great indicators of collapse. Nothing has really gone. I don't know. The Burj Khalifa might be an indicator of an almighty one in the near future then. But all of these massive buildings in Southeast Asia have become, if you follow the theory, great symbols of the coming collapse there and the complete gaga credit loosening and the false kind of economic spending sprees that this talks about. But yeah, they're actually taking more of the tone that we have now. It's interesting if you read when you look at the NPR article from 2019 and you look at this Financial Times article from 2022, the tone is very different. The tone in 2019 was, the poor Sri Lankans being victimized by the evil economic Chinese, and then this is like, well, everyone's lost their investment. It's like, yeah, the Chinese are trying to push them into debt. You can't debt trap a bankrupt person. It's you can't get blood from a stone. And China's looking like it's lined its pockets with a whole lot of stones recently. Distress leading to a spate of bailouts. China is fighting debt fires on several fronts. Aid data has uncovered evidence of tens of billions of US dollars in rescue loans being extended by China's state institutions, generally in the form of short-term injections of hard currency that allow debtor countries to service their loans and avoid default. Countries receiving such loans so far have included Pakistan, Argentina, Belarus, Egypt, Mongolia, Nigeria, Turkey, Ukraine, Sri Lanka. Basically, all the worst places to invest in. Like, don't invest in Argentina. They have. Don't invest in Belarus.
No.
You know, don't invest in Egypt, Nigeria. Like it's like they've got like the laundry list of countries that have defaulted and left their creditors in massive trouble. That is the list, really. People don't realize it, but Egypt as well has been a massive financial black hole for decades. Um,
You don't know that.
if
Yes, that's it. Not just decades, actually. Not just decades. Hundreds of years.
hundreds of the British learned that the hard way.
Yeah. Hundreds of years. Yeah. And Nigeria is an interesting one. Wasn't it Nigeria where they ended up setting fire to a bunch of officials and making the Chinese watch? And
Basically,
literally
yes.
told them to go back and tell your bosses what happened here. Kind of tier
It was
stuff.
there was some deaths in a factory, and it caused villagers to revolt, basically.
Yes.
Yeah. Abby Ferrari says, "I'm listening to you from Argentina, and I agree." Yeah. Also, if you don't know the sovereign debt history of Argentina, that's a whole ride in of itself. Because part of the Argentinian navy, if I recall correctly, got repossessed by a hedge fund. That's something we've talked about before. We've
Yeah.
talked about the power of international finance versus, supposedly sovereign nations. International finance is far more powerful than the Argentinian government is, especially when it comes to them not being able to service certain debt. But yeah, that really is the list of countries where your money will be gone, which maybe China should have known. Maybe they thought it would be different this time. But yeah, China, please. There's a lot of historical precedent here.
Rob, bringing up the Pepsi fleet. It wasn't just an aircraft carrier. They had a whole naval fleet.
Nuclear submarines, they had destroyers, they had all kinds. They had like dozens of, they had a full, they had a proper functioning navy.
Yeah.
Well, not functioning because most of it was rotted out.
It was rotted out, and they had made an agreement with everyone concerned to just immediately scrap it. I don't know if people would have been too happy with them rocking around with the biggest navy in the world.
Well, it goes on to say that these mounting problems do not obscure the fact that the fast construction of infrastructure in many developing countries around the world with Chinese finances helped to drive development. Examples of youthful projects abound. A 750-kilometer railway line from Addis Ababa to Djibouti. Those don't sound like real places. I know they are, but they never do. Has cut the journey time between the Ethiopian capital to the key port from around 3 days to about 12 hours. Similarly, a new line from Mombasa to Nairobi in Kenya, which cost 3.2 billion, cuts journey time significantly. Hydropower, blah blah blah. But the issue is that these countries can simply take the money and run. And this infrastructure doesn't really directly benefit China unless they maintain a high presence in the country, so it can be expensive. And also, we don't know how long this infrastructure will last. As we've seen with China, as we've seen with Africa, there is a huge precedent for them not maintaining infrastructure and allowing infrastructure to rot. And also infrastructure from many, many years ago being greatly diminished. See basically everything left by the British.
Yes, we left them rail lines, roads, infrastructure galore, and they just didn't maintain it. It's just fallen to pieces.
I believe the term is barefoot over diamonds.
Yes. There wasn't I can't remember. It's been an age since I've seen it, but there was an interview, and there was a Chinese guy in a car, I believe it was, talking to an African, and they were just driving around and looking at these things, and the Chinese guy was absolutely horrified at the state of what they'd been left. And it was just like, we built up from nothing, and you had all of this. You had all of this given to you, and you let it rot. Yeah,
that's quite a famous clip. Yeah, I think there's two. There's one where he's driving around. There's one where he's interviewing him.
Yeah.
And he's talking about the fact that comparatively, China had less railway than a lot of African countries did at the same time, and the development difference and stuff like that. But I don't know, infrastructure in Africa doesn't do a lot without the underlying governmental changes and societal changes. You can't just force Africa to be a Western economy. they may have the superhighways, but that, as we've seen, that large infrastructure building in the abstract doesn't do anything. Like, fair enough, it now takes 12 hours rather than 3 days, but that doesn't help unless they have everything else around to take advantage of it. There's no point in having a superhighway between two places if nothing really is going to be driven on it.
No.
And I wouldn't be surprised if in 15 years most of these are seen as follies.
Yes, like the one that's famously through Spain that the Top Gear guys went and found and highlighted. There's a lot of them. A lot of governments do this nonsense. They build highways between point A and point B, and expecting lots and lots of traffic, and then nobody goes there because everyone in A is far more interested in going to D and E, and nobody in B cares. Or B isn't even built yet. I've got cities in Spain, whole cities and airports and stuff.
Yep. It is indeed also tiresome, but it's yeah, but where debts burdens prove unsustainable, China often finds itself obliged to issue new loans or face the broader distress that follows a default. Pakistan, the biggest single recipient of Belt and Road financing worldwide, with a total of 62 billion in Chinese finance pledges, is a case in point. Yeah, Pakistan's been on the edge of default for a very long time. Yeah, here's, if you scroll down, there's actually a oh god, that's so funny. Sorry, there's a chart here about the biggest problem for Belt and Road loans is in sub-Saharan Africa. Yeah, of course it is. Here we go. Yeah, number of loans needed to extended by the Chinese creditors that have to be renegotiated since 2001. Sub-Saharan Africa, 101. Asia, 101. There's been more loan negotiations by a large margin than the average IQ in that area. That's really funny.
I mean, to be fair, it's 101. That's a fair old chunk of most places.
Oh god, that's funny. That's so yeah. No shit, you're gonna have to renegotiate your debt to sub-Saharan Africa. Like, what did they think? What did they think was gonna happen? You're pouring billions in modern infrastructure and technology into a region of the world where the average IQ is in its 70s.
Yeah.
It's why the British had to pull out. It's why everybody who's tried to do this has had to pull out, because they just simply, you can't civilize people who don't want to be civilized.
Yeah, you bankrupt yourself in the process. Trying to tell people that the British Empire nearly bankrupted itself trying to actually have an empire is.
It was the British Empire, and Cecil Rhodes has a lot to answer for. It really did cripple the kind of British advancement into the 20th century, and became a millstone around its neck in many ways. This stuff doesn't work and has never worked.
No.
And as we got into the two world wars, it became ruinous trying to wage war and maintain an empire. It was impossible, and it broke the back of British power. In that now we're in such a diminished state than what we were, 70 years ago. The next sector talks about China steps back from Belt and Road. The volume of Belt and Road loans is full. Wow, look at that graph. That graph's very revealing. I'm not sure how accurate it is, but yeah, announced and actual loans by Chinese lenders, number of transactions over $1 billion has fallen significantly.
Plummeted.
Yes, its height was 2015. It rose a little bit in 2019, but post-pandemic and dealing with a lot of the internal problems that China's been suffering from, it really has just dropped. I want to leave this one till quite late on here because it's so revealing, really, that China's experiment has largely failed. The big question now facing China as debt distress spreads amid slowing global growth is whether they want to extend. Whether and what to extent Beijing will participate in multilateral debt resolution programs in Belt and Road countries. The big thing here that I went to kind of getting here is that China can't do what the USA does. In that what the US will do with their economic interests is always have that hint of there's always that hint of intervention. There's always that hint of invasion. There's always that idea that either via the UN or through some other vector that there will be either a mass sanction situation in which they're frozen out of the international money markets, or there will quite literally be a boots on the ground situation, like in South America, where either the CIA or somebody else will quite literally sponsor regime change to try and get their money back, or to try and defend their interests.
The Middle
and
East,
China,
everywhere.
yeah.
America are very, very quick to test out their new toys to back up their debts. Yes. China not so much. China actually significantly not so much. Nobody feels in threat of a yellow sort of sea of Chinese forces flooding their country. Whereas all you need to do is be in debt to America and then find oil, and Fortunate Son will start playing on the horizon fairly rapidly.
Yes. There's also, like I talked about, the way in which, like, Sri Lanka has shown that when this program fails, they can always turn back to the IMF in the West.
Mm-hmm.
And that these countries are financial black holes, but the IMF, the World Bank are quite literally set up to take advantage of these countries, to turn the kind of the debt cycle and the endless bottomless pit into an asset. They become these money laundering areas. They are much more adept at dealing with these detonations, as they've had a lot more experience with it than China is.
Yes.
They've been doing it for many, many years in Africa.
Money printer goes burr. Pretty much.
And there are things that the Americans and to a lesser extent the Europeans are able to get out of these Chinese nations that is not monetary, and that is longer term. And like I said, they are the ones with the financial system hegemony right now. China doesn't have the reserve currency. It doesn't have the economic bully power the US does. No. So it is unable to really carry as big a stick when it comes to reclaiming its investment in other countries. It's really just that simple.
They've got no form. They've got absolutely no form in terms of military power. As we mentioned earlier, their most recent military incursion was against a bunch of Indian people, and a bunch of them died whilst calling each other names because they fell off a hill.
Yep, that's exactly. Yep.
This is not strong form. Whereas you go, oh well, what are the Americans going to do? Oh shit, that's a lot of tanks and a lot of helicopters and a lot of planes, and oh god, we're all dead now.
Knowing the Americans, they'll probably lose in the end, but they'll make your country a mess, and that's all they really need to do.
Yes, they'll make a colossal mess, and then they'll pull out because it's becoming very, very expensive for them to keep there, because one thing America can't deal with is an insurgent warfare, and it gets them every time.
I will say that, sorry, I'm a little bit late reading this, but Tank Imperative donated $10 Canadian through Super Chat, thank you, and said, let's export the debt in hope that we will be able to avoid the crash. This has never gone wrong in the history of economics.
Quite right. Absolutely right.
It's true, but it's how circus going, and every time there's a bailout, and every time, they avoid the crisis by making things materially worse for everyone, and people just get used to the new normal, and the cycle goes on and on and on. But that's just the way the dance is done in Western democracies, I'm afraid. And China, as authoritarian and as blustering as it can be, is not as good at being a shit on the international stage as America is. They haven't quite learned how to do it properly yet, which is kind of heartening, I guess, but it also really just reveals how, I don't know, how bad the West, in quotes, behaves, and terrible some of these initiatives are from people like the IMF and the World Bank. I mean, we looked at one of the documents from the IMF from about 2001, I think, about the justification for the imposition of, like, control over monetary policy, and they compared it to the Rothschilds in Prussia taking collateral. They actually mention the Rothschild Prussian loans as a positive example.
Based.
Maybe it was a different time, but I don't know. Not based on the example that you're using, but it was just very funny to see it brought up in that context. I was like, wait, what? What are they? It's like an architect, like an international architecture firm bringing up Building 7 as an example of great controlled demolitions. And you're like, huh?
Wait, I knew it!
Excuse me, sir?
You said that out loud.
It's the forget, never forget cycle.
Yes.
But there's a couple more links here, I think. There's, I think the last link we have here, apart from just a little diagram about just how many countries have signed up to some level of Belt and Road, which is basically every country that isn't Australia, New Zealand, India, or Western Europe or North America. It's basically the entirety of Africa and Asia and large parts of Eastern and actually Southern Europe, which is quite interesting. But the other one is the TFI Global. Again, I think this is Indian, maybe, in origin, but it says even Zimbabwe, which is funny just hearing the words even Zimbabwe. Realizes now that China is a paper dragon. China has been trying to make a strong foothold in Africa, the African continent, for the sake of exploiting its abundant resources. Chinese companies have enjoyed a great degree of freedom to operate in Africa on market terms, in addition to being backed by Chinese investment capital in favorable terms. But lately, multiple nations of Africa are rising up in revolt against the interfering policies of China in their countries. Zimbabwe is one of them. In a recent incident, the Chinese embassy in Harare has been criticized by the Media Alliance of Zimbabwe for intimidating a weekly newspaper after the latter published information about malpractices by Chinese mining corporations.
You hear so much about malpractice by the Chinese in various African countries. You really do. There's a number of stories of people going around going, oh yes, I'm creating a Chinese school, send your children here, and then he's just using them for basically YouTube videos. They're not getting any education whatsoever, and they're just basically going on doing YouTube videos, saying Chinese things like we're black and idiots and so on, and getting lots of Chinese people to laugh at them. It's amazing how often this has happened at this point. And the Chinese being massively racist all laugh along at this, and then the African countries find out and go completely shit at them, and rightly so.
Oh no, Ben Gailey's asking about the Rothschild Prussia loan. I don't want to get into the full history of the Rothschild banking family on this stream because that's its own stream. Although it has become a weirdly safe subject on YouTube because it's been pushed into conspiracy circles in which it's basically put in the same realm as like Flat Earth and things like that deliberately. It's not a conspiracy, it's just history.
Yes.
It's the it's the Prussian loan of 1818 and the Austrian loan of 1865. But the Prussian loan basically was one of the first instances of a large banking cartel lending a government a kind of government-sized amount of money, let's say. And what people were surprised by is that the terms said that if Prussia didn't pay back the loan, that the Rothschild bank and family would own large parts of Prussian territory, and they would essentially become the new kings of Prussia in many ways. And this was justified as the size of the loan, the exceptional loan requiring exceptional collateral. But what many people realize is that when you give countries this kind of loan, what you are doing is you are incentivizing the loan giver to force the country into default, and therefore taking over parts of its territory and infrastructure.
Yeah.
And it's cited as one of the examples of the corrosive nature and nefarious nature of, let's say, international financial families, and how they are incentivized to let's say, degrade nations in certain ways for their own gain, because the value of the loan is generally less than or equal to the value of the collateral. And as a power broker, you can't buy the kind of collateral that was put up for the loan, because the loan going bad is supposed to be unthinkable. It's supposed to just be there as security. It's like how losing your house on a medium-sized loan isn't supposed to be possible, but then the bank comes in and gets you fired, basically. It's that kind of thing. Or someone comes in and fucks with you, or they come up with some technicality in which you can't pay the loan, which does happen. You see it in in predatory lending in different places. But that's one of the examples that was used by someone actually within the IMF, talking about how they secure loans with international lenders, and the fact that they require they don't do direct collateral, but they do essentially kind of like very strict economic conditions imposed on the debtor nations, which arguably in some ways is worse, because it really means that the IMF is able to dictate swathes of government policy no matter who is in power in the country. If they don't want to be in a state of they don't want to be a state of default and essentially have the international credit rating destroyed and have access to money markets still, they have to listen to what the IMF tells them about policy.
Yeah, it leads to more debts and so on. I mean, I'm on the Rothschilds archive website, and it is down as a watershed moment and beginning 200 years of innovation in European capital market banking. So they have a different take on it, but they would. And yeah, no, it is one of the original, predatory loans, and on a country scale. Rothschilds, dude. Not even once. Never do business.
Well, it's one of the defining moments in international capital entering into hard power, entering into the status in which they can dictate policies of governments, become power brokers, or even take over territory and land. But again, we're getting a little bit off topic here. That's not the topic of this stream. It will be a topic of a future stream. I do see our viewers shooting back up.
Welcome to the rice field, motherfucker!
Yeah, it's the whole point here is that Zimbabwe is an example of the fact that China is being beaten out of Africa in many ways. It's been beaten back.
Sometimes literally.
The narrative has turned against them.
Mm-hmm.
They've been caught doing a lot of shady stuff, and they're essentially being chased out by gangs of angry locals in many places, and they don't really have the strength to back it up. They can't really go in there and get their investment back. Yeah. JD says, so don't make deals with the fiddlers on the roof. Also, JD said a couple minutes ago that he's only just noticed our avatars currently. So, well, very slow poke. Well done. But it's, again, a lot of people consider the Rothschild loans a conspiracy theory, but they're a point of historical fact. And again, the tone of what is told differs on who you ask, but the facts of the matter are not in dispute. I don't know, Trig. It's got a little bit of time here. We are we do tend to try and keep these streams quite lean, but I'll have a look through and make sure I've not missed any super chats or anything, because there has been a lot of donations today. People really seem to enjoy us talking about China, which has been long overdue. To be fair, we've had so many other China. But there's so many other topics to go over. It's been very difficult to find time for China. But I'm also very happy. This is one of the favorite thumbnails that I've made. I had like an image in my head of like the big round Winnie the Pooh, his body being the globe and a belt round it. There's a road. A bit of a literal metaphor, but I was just I wanted to make sure I could put on the thumbnail what was actually in my head, and I'm quite happy with that. It's I also always love those social credit score memes with the pop, the really bad smiley face with the eyes popping out.
Oh god, yeah. Sorry.
Social...
Rick Farrell's asking if there was many half Chinese babies born in Africa. Surprisingly not. No, the Chinese men are not a fan of the African women on the whole. It seems. They are not over there.
Well, probably vice
Spreading.
versa.
And well, yeah.
There's an interesting phenomenon. I don't know. I hate to say largely on Reddit, but largely on Reddit, in which you get a lot of. I think Elliot Rodger was an example of this. About Asian men, specifically a lot of like Korean men, complaining about the fact that Asian women want white Western husbands.
Yes. Well,
and don't like Asian men in general. They tend to get the shorter end of the stick in the dating pool, no matter where they are. Mostly because of certain stereotypes, let's say.
Genetic traits.
Possibly, but the Asian men dating market is also not the subject of this stream. God, Google Images really has just died, hasn't it? Wow.
Is it? Absolutely.
I can't get it to work properly. Bing Images is working fine for me, but I love those social credit scores fallen memes. They're just so funny.
My Google Images is working okay.
My Chrome might just be shitting the bed then for some reason. I had weird trouble with Chrome today too.
God, imagine using Chrome. Brave, my dude. Brave. Way forward, honestly. I know it's Chromium, but it's so much better.
Oh no, I say Chrome. I also run a custom kind of Chromium install thing.
Okay.
I'm a bit of a maybe that's the issue. I am running the browser equivalent of like a Linux.
Yeah, I know. As if not more than me.
There it is. Here's the one I use partially in the thumbnail. When I get this one on screen, I'll put it in the stream resources. But this meme always just cracks me up. It is endlessly amusing.
Oh, yeah. Yes.
Is there anything you think we missed? Last chat and I'll ask you, Trig, about Belt and Road. I know we can't talk about it completely in detail, but in terms of the recent news and in terms of kind of the trajectory it's taken,
I think we've covered a lot of it. I mean, it really did. To say Paper Tiger, it really has. It was a very, very ambitious project. 2013, heavy investment up until 2015. 2016, for some reason, it's been on decline ever since, and it has just plummeted off ever since then. I really think that they've found Africa and some of the Southeast Asia markets bad investments. I know Europe really bought into it and were like, well, hey, this is a great idea, and charged off, which is why you've got that movement to push through Turkey, because for some reason the EU seem desperate to get Turkey involved in the EU. It's I think so personally somewhat of a bad idea. Remember,
yeah, it is a bad idea, but it's kind of the hopeful delusion of this globalism.
Yes.
That there's this idea that they are just going to be able somehow to bring them all to the table and get this all done.
Yes.
God, I didn't realize that 101 loans have had to be negotiated in sub-Saharan Africa. Though.
I know, it's mad. It's 2/3, if not more, of their entire number of loans they've had to redo. Where is it there?
Bengal, I think BAP is kind of a retard, but I also think he is right about China. That's Brunjay's pervert for you guys who don't know. 101. But what China's realized is that sub-Saharan Africa can and will just take your money, which anyone in America can tell you. Something slave port locations.
Yep. I remember they were the ones selling them.
The native African "we don't want you back, our ancestors sold you" movement is hilarious. But again, African Black Twitter is something else.
And another stream when we really, really want to commit social suicide.
Those guys are hardcore. They will.
Ooh.
You think you've seen roasts, and then you see Africans roasting African Americans. Good lord, that's some good stuff. But shall we get the rice fields up one more time, then say goodbye then?
It feels like it's not welcome to,
Welcome
but
to the rice field, motherfucker!
maybe
Farewell from the rice fields, yes.
farewell indeed. Yeah, I think that will that sums it up. In fact, you know what? We'll leave that up as the end screen because you know what? Why not?
Got one more donation here,
Oh, yeah.
just to finish off with, saying you control African food supply if you want something from Africa. Example is Western Food Aid. Yes.
Yes.
The West has been very good with the aid programs, with the sponsor a child stuff. That stuff has been far more effective than we built highway. You also basically bribe all the warlords.
Yes.
But once again, China not overperforming the West in terms of off black people. They don't seem to be able to do it quite as well. Again, thank you guys for watching. Thank you for all the donations. There's been rather a lot today.
Thank you.
Both in Streamlabs and on Super Chat. So thank you very much for those. We'll be back next week. I'm not quite sure what we'll be covering, but Evelyn will be back. I'm thinking of making not August because I'll be very busy in August, but September possibly might be a bit of an off month in terms of me being very, very busy. So I'm going to try and get some of the esoterica stuff started then, because we've had people not hounding us, but very, very curious about the
Yep. No.
the Hyperborea stuff, a lot of the other stuff we've been talking about. So.
I'm all for that. I've just finished the Book of the Giants, and the Book of the Book of King Og, Book of Enoch, and the Book of the Giants, which is all leading up to the Flood era, where Nephilim and Rephaim are fighting as the floods are actually starting. These are all Dead Sea Scrolls. Wild reading, absolutely wild stuff. I would love to talk about that at some point. I'll send you some links to it. It is proper bonkers stuff.
Well, we should probably just do a stream about demonology and the hierarchy of angels, because that could just be that could be a whole stream on its own.
Oh yeah, certainly. But some of the apocrypha books, some of the angels coming down and just literally going, these human females are hot, let's shag some. Oh, we've created giants and the women have exploded. Oh well, oh no, the giants are shagging goats and drinking people's blood. Oh no, they're having massive wars with other giants. Great fun. It's like Lord of the Rings but biblical.
Yeah, something wheels of eyes. But
yeah,
thank you guys for coming, and I will say goodbye from me.
And a good night from you.
Yes, and a goodbye from the rice fields. Good night.
Indeed. Good night.
Oh, there we go.